The sun was setting over downtown Los Angeles, casting long shadows between the towering buildings and creating a golden glow that bounced off the gleaming windows of the city's most popular electronics store. It was one of those Friday afternoons when the weekend excitement was already in the air and people were rushing to finish their shopping before heading home. Inside the store, the atmosphere was electric. The latest gadgets blinked and flashed from their displays, drawing in curious customers like moths to a flame. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background, barely noticeable over the buzz of conversations and the occasional beep of scanners at the checkout counters. A young woman in a wheelchair had been patiently waiting at the customer service desk for what felt like an eternity. Her professional attire, a crisp blue blazer and matching slacks, suggested she had just come from work. She was a brilliant software engineer at one of the city's top tech companies, known for her innovative solutions and problem-solving skills. Despite her impressive credentials, she found herself being completely ignored by the store employee behind the counter. The employee, a tall guy with an expensive smartwatch and perfectly styled hair, seemed more interested in his phone than in helping any customers. He kept scrolling through his social media feed, occasionally glancing up with an annoyed expression whenever someone approached the counter. His name tag was partially hidden behind his designer jacket, and his body language screamed that he'd rather be anywhere else. The woman in the wheelchair had spotted the exact laptop she needed for her upcoming project. It was displayed on the top shelf just a few feet away, but completely out of her reach. She had rehearsed her request in her mind several times, determined to stay professional despite the frustrating wait. Around her, other customers came and went, some throwing sympathetic glances her way, others too absorbed in their own shopping to notice. The store was getting busier by the minute. A group of teenagers huddled around the latest gaming consoles, their excited chatter filling the air. A businessman in a hurry almost knocked over a display of phone cases, causing a small commotion. Through it all, the woman waited, her patience starting to wear thin but her dignity intact. What nobody in the store realized was that fate had something interesting in store for them all. Just outside, a black motorcycle had pulled up to the curb. Its rider, dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, was about to walk into the store. This wasn't just any customer. It was Keanu Reeves himself, though he wasn't looking for attention. He just needed to pick up a charger for his phone before heading to his next location. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, letting in a burst of warm California air. A few heads turned to look at the new arrival, but most people were too preoccupied to notice that one of Hollywood's most beloved actors had just walked in. The stage was set for what would become a memorable lesson in human kindness and dignity. As Keanu made his way toward the accessories section, he couldn't help but notice the scene unfolding at the customer service counter. His eyes moved from the distracted employee to the patient woman in the wheelchair, and his expression changed ever so slightly. Anyone who knew him would recognize that look. It was the same one he got when he saw something that wasn't right and knew he had to do something about it. The next few minutes would prove that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, and that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just wear black jackets and have the courage to speak up when others won't. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the woman in the wheelchair managed to catch the employee's attention. She had been practicing patience all her life, but even she had her limits. She cleared her throat politely, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she looked up at the counter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and professional. "I've been waiting for quite a while. I need some assistance reaching a laptop on the top shelf." She gestured toward the sleek device displayed about 7 feet up, just visible from where they were standing. The laptop was exactly what she needed for her upcoming software development project: lightweight, powerful, and perfect for coding on the go. The employee finally looked up from his phone, but his expression made it clear that he considered this an unwelcome interruption. He didn't even try to hide his annoyance as he let out a dramatic sigh, the kind that made everyone within earshot feel uncomfortable. His designer watch caught the fluorescent light as he gestured dismissively with his hand. "Look," he said, not even bothering to make eye contact, "we're really short-staffed right now." He glanced back at his phone as it buzzed with another notification. "You'll have to come back later or bring someone with you who can help." His tone dripped with contempt, as if helping customers was beneath him. The woman's cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. She had faced this kind of treatment before, but it never got easier. Around her, other customers pretended not to notice, though a few shot disapproving looks at the employee. An elderly couple nearby whispered to each other, clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. "I don't understand," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her growing frustration. "Isn't it part of your job to assist customers? I just need someone to reach the laptop so I can look at it." She was a successful professional who had overcome countless obstacles in her life, yet here she was, being treated like an inconvenience. The employee rolled his eyes and turned his attention back to his phone. "Like I said, we're short-staffed. Maybe try coming back during a less busy time." He didn't even attempt to hide the fact that he was now playing a game on his phone, his fingers tapping away at the screen. The store buzzed with activity around them. A child laughed somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing off the high ceiling. Music played softly through the store's speakers, a pop song about kindness and love that seemed particularly ironic at that moment. The woman sat there, stunned by the blatant discrimination she was facing. She thought about speaking up more forcefully, about demanding to see a manager, about calling out this treatment for what it was, pure discrimination. But years of similar experiences had taught her that sometimes it wasn't worth the energy. Still, something inside her refused to just wheel away and accept defeat. What neither of them realized was that their exchange had caught the attention of someone else in the store. The man in the black jacket had paused his shopping, the phone charger he'd come to buy forgotten in his hand. His familiar face was partially hidden by his long dark hair, but his eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding at the customer service counter. Keanu Reeves had built a reputation in Hollywood not just for his acting, but for his kindness and humility. He was known for treating everyone with respect, from major movie executives to subway janitors. And now, as he watched this display of casual cruelty, something in his expression changed. The usual gentle calm in his eyes was replaced by a quiet determination. The air in the store seemed to grow thicker with tension. Other customers who had recognized him now watched with interest, wondering what would happen next. The employee remained oblivious, still tapping away at his phone game, while the woman in the wheelchair sat there, her dignity intact despite the humiliation she was enduring. The stage was set for what would become not just a lesson in basic human decency, but a moment that would soon go viral across social media platforms and news outlets worldwide. Sometimes the universe has a way of putting the right person in the right place at exactly the right time, and this was about to become one of those moments. Keanu Reeves hadn't planned on becoming involved in anyone else's story that day. He'd simply pulled up to the electronics store on his motorcycle, looking to grab a replacement charger before heading to a friend's house for dinner. The California sun was getting lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the store's large windows, and he'd hoped to make it a quick stop. He'd entered quietly, as was his style. Despite being one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, he had a way of blending in when he wanted to. His well-worn black jacket and casual jeans helped him maintain a low profile, and his long dark hair partially obscured his face. A few people had done double takes, the kind he was used to, that moment of, "Is that really him?" followed by respectful distance. The store's atmosphere had seemed normal at first, the usual buzz of customers exploring the latest tech, the soft hum of conversation, the occasional beep of scanners at the registers. He'd made his way toward the accessory section, weaving between displays of the newest smartphones and laptops. That's when he'd first noticed the scene unfolding at the customer service counter. At first, he tried to mind his own business. Celebrity or not, he understood the value of privacy and didn't want to intrude. But as he stood there, pretending to examine phone charges, he couldn't help but overhear the exchange. The employee's dismissive tone cut through the ambient noise of the store like a knife, and the quiet dignity of the woman in the wheelchair struck a chord deep within him. Memories flooded his mind, stories his sister had shared about her own struggles with illness, moments from his life when he'd witnessed both the worst and best of human nature. He'd always believed that true character was revealed in how people treated others when they thought nobody important was watching. Right now, he was watching something that went against everything he believed in. His hands tensed around the charger he was holding. Years of martial arts training for movie roles had taught him about control, about choosing the right moment to act. He observed how other customers were reacting, some pretending not to notice, others shooting disapproving glances but remaining silent. The air conditioning hummed overhead, a stark contrast to the heated tension building at the service counter. Through the store speakers, ironically, one of his movie's soundtracks was playing softly in the background. He almost smiled at the coincidence, but the situation at hand kept his expression serious. He watched as the woman maintained her composure despite the employee's rudeness, and he felt a deep respect for her strength. More customers had begun to notice him now. A teenage girl whispered to her mother, pointing discreetly in his direction. A man in a business suit did a triple take while pretending to examine a laptop. But Keanu's attention remained fixed on the scene at the counter. He noticed how the employee's designer watch caught the light as he gestured dismissively, how his phone seemed permanently attached to his hand like a lifeline. The woman in the wheelchair represented everything he'd come to admire in people: resilience, patience, dignity in the face of unfairness. The employee, unfortunately, represented something he'd seen too often in his decades in Los Angeles: that casual cruelty that comes from believing some people matter less than others. He felt the weight of the moment building. As someone who'd spent his life in the spotlight, he understood the power of actions over words. He knew that what happened next could either reinforce the employee's behavior or become a teaching moment that might reach far beyond the walls of the store. Around him, the usual sounds of the electronics store continued: the demo videos playing on TV screens, the chatter of customers, the beeping of price scanners. But to Keanu, it all faded into the background as he made his decision. He'd never been one to seek attention or create scenes, but he'd also never been able to stand by and watch injustice unfold. Setting down the charger he'd been holding, he took a deep breath. The time for being a silent observer was over. Sometimes, he knew, doing the right thing meant stepping out of your comfort zone, even if you're someone who values privacy as much as he does. What happened next would soon become a story shared around the world, though that wasn't his intention at all. The moment Keanu Reeves began walking toward the customer service counter, the atmosphere in the store shifted. His footsteps were quiet but purposeful on the polished floor. A few customers who had recognized him stopped what they were doing, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The soft music playing through the store's speakers seemed to fade into the background. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle but carrying a weight that made the employee finally look up from his phone. The recognition didn't hit immediately. The employee's annoyed expression lingered for a split second before his eyes widened and his phone nearly slipped from his suddenly trembling hands. "I couldn't help but notice this lady needs assistance," Keanu continued, maintaining that same calm tone that had made him famous in countless movies. He wasn't trying to be intimidating, but there was an undeniable presence about him that commanded attention. The woman in the wheelchair looked up, surprised by this unexpected intervention. By now, the store had grown remarkably quiet. The usual beeping of scanners and chatter of customers had died down as people realized what was happening. A small crowd had begun to form, keeping a respectful distance but unable to resist watching the scene unfold. Someone's child whispered loudly, "Mom, isn't that John Wick?" only to be quietly shushed. The employee's face had turned a shade paler, and his designer watch caught the light as his hand nervously adjusted his collar. We're short-staffed right now," he stammered, the excuse sounding even weaker now that he was saying it to one of Hollywood's most respected actors. Keanu's expression remained gentle, but his words carried a clear message. "You know," he said, gesturing to the phone still clutched in the employee's hand, "in the time you've spent ignoring her, you could have helped several customers." His voice wasn't angry or accusatory. If anything, it sounded almost sad, disappointed in the way humanity sometimes treats its own. The woman in the wheelchair sat straighter, a mix of emotions playing across her face: gratitude, vindication, and something else, perhaps hope in humanity restored. Around them, a few customers nodded in agreement. An elderly man near the tablet display whispered, "That's what I'm talking about," just loud enough to be heard. "The laptop she wants," Keanu continued, pointing to the high shelf, "would take less than a minute to reach. Instead, you've spent." He glanced at the designer watch on the employee's wrist. "What looks like 20 minutes making someone feel less than welcome in your store." The employee's phone had disappeared into his pocket now, and his face had shifted from pale to red. The reality of what he'd done, and who was calling him out on it, seemed to be sinking in. A few customers had their phones out, discreetly recording the interaction, though most were simply watching in respectful silence. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a phone rang unanswered. The employee opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words. His name tag glinted under the store lights as he shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Keanu wasn't done yet, but his next words were spoken even more softly, meant more as guidance than criticism. You know, we're all just trying to make our way in this world. It costs nothing to be kind, to take a moment to help someone who needs it. That's what makes us human, right? The words hung in the air, simple but profound. A few people in the growing crowd nodded silently. The woman in the wheelchair smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her entire face. Even a couple of other store employees who had gathered at the edges of the scene looked thoughtful, perhaps reflecting on their own customer service practices. The store's generic pop music continued to play overhead, creating an almost surreal backdrop to this moment of human connection and learning. The sun had shifted outside, sending long golden rays through the store's front windows, illuminating the scene in an almost cinematic way. But this wasn't a movie scene, it was real life, and sometimes real life offers moments more powerful than any script could create. The store manager's arrival changed the atmosphere instantly. He burst out of his office, having been alerted by another employee about the commotion on the sales floor. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples, wearing a crisp blue shirt with the store's logo. The moment he took in the scene, Keanu Reeves standing at his customer service counter, a woman in a wheelchair looking relieved, and his employee shrinking behind the counter, his expression shifted from concern to understanding. "I sincerely apologize for what's happened here," the manager said, addressing the woman directly. His voice carried the weight of genuine remorse. He didn't seem starstruck by Keanu's presence. Instead, his focus was entirely on making things right. "This isn't what our store stands for, and it's definitely not how we train our staff to treat any customer." The crowd that had gathered was still watching intently, phones discreetly capturing this moment of accountability. The afternoon sun streaming through the windows created long shadows across the polished floor, and the store's background music seemed to have shifted to something softer, more fitting for this moment of resolution. "Sir," the manager turned to Keanu, "thank you for stepping in. Sometimes it takes someone willing to speak up to remind us of our basic responsibilities to each other." Keanu nodded quietly, that familiar humble smile crossing his face. He wasn't interested in recognition. His focus remained on ensuring the situation was properly resolved. The employee behind the counter had gone from red-faced to pale again, his designer watch no longer gleaming quite so proudly on his wrist. His phone stayed firmly in his pocket now, and his body language showed he finally understood the gravity of his actions. The manager's stern glance in his direction suggested that a serious conversation would follow. What happened next surprised everyone. Keanu stepped forward and personally offered to help the woman select her laptop. "I hear you're a software engineer," he said warmly, showing genuine interest. "I've worked with some amazing engineers on film projects. Would you mind telling me what kind of work you do while we look at that laptop you were interested in?" The woman's face lit up as they moved toward the laptop display. She began explaining her current project, something involving artificial intelligence and music composition. Keanu listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was genuinely interested, not just being polite. The manager quickly brought over a stepladder and retrieved several laptop models for them to compare. The other customers watched in amazement as one of Hollywood's biggest stars spent the next 15 minutes engaged in a detailed conversation about processor speeds and RAM requirements. He shared stories about the technology used in his movies, making everyone within earshot smile at his enthusiasm and humility. "The thing about computers," he said, making the woman laugh with his spot-on impression of his character from The Matrix, "is that they're a lot like people. They work best when they're treated with respect and given the right support." The parallel to the situation that had just unfolded wasn't lost on anyone. The manager had stepped away briefly and returned with a special offer sheet. "In addition to our sincerest apologies," he said, "we'd like to offer you our premium service package with your purchase, completely free of charge. This includes priority technical support and extended warranty coverage." His gesture was genuine, not merely damage control. But before the woman could respond, Keanu quietly stepped in. He spoke softly to the manager, his words not meant for everyone to hear, but his intention was clear from his gestures toward the laptop. The manager's eyes widened slightly, then he nodded with understanding and respect. The store's lighting had shifted as the sun continued its descent outside, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The tension from earlier had completely dissipated, replaced by something more positive. A sense that sometimes difficult moments can lead to unexpected connections and positive change. Through it all, the woman maintained her dignity and grace, accepting both the apology and the assistance with professionalism. Her expertise shone through as she discussed the technical specifications with both Keanu and the manager, reminding everyone that assumptions about ability have no place in modern society. By the next morning, videos of the incident had spread across social media like wildfire. The first clip appeared on TikTok, posted by a college student who had been shopping for headphones when everything unfolded. The video started with Keanu's quiet intervention and quickly gathered millions of views. Comments flooded in from around the world, many sharing their own experiences with discrimination in retail spaces. "Just watched this 5 times," one comment read. "The way he handled it without yelling or making a scene, that's real leadership." Another person wrote, "This is why Keanu is the internet's favorite human. He doesn't just talk about kindness, he lives it." Twitter picked up the story next. Someone had captured the moment from a different angle, showing the woman's face lighting up as Keanu engaged her in conversation about her software engineering work. The hashtag #BeMoreLikeKeanu started trending, alongside hashtag retail accessibility. People began sharing their own stories of retail experiences, both good and bad. A local news van pulled up outside the electronics store early that morning. The reporter, a woman in her 30s with a warm smile, was hoping to interview staff about the incident. But true to his nature, Keanu had slipped away quietly after ensuring the woman got her laptop. He hadn't stuck around for praise or recognition. That wasn't his style. What nobody knew was that before leaving, he had quietly handled the payment for the laptop. The woman only discovered this when she went to pay, and the manager explained with a smile that her purchase had been taken care of. There was also a handwritten note from one tech enthusiast to another. "Keep creating amazing things. KR." The employee who had caused the incident was required to undergo comprehensive sensitivity training. The store manager had made it clear this wasn't about punishment, but about learning and growing. The young man, still shaken by the experience, had posted a public apology on his social media. "Yesterday, I learned the hardest and most important lesson of my career. My actions were inexcusable, and I'm committed to doing better." The store's corporate office took notice too. Within days, they announced a nationwide initiative to improve accessibility training for all employees. "What happened in our LA store showed us we need to do better," their statement read. "We're implementing mandatory accessibility awareness programs and reviewing our store layouts to ensure everyone feels welcome." Professional organizations for people with disabilities began reaching out to the woman, asking her to share her story. She was hesitant at first. She hadn't asked for any of this attention. But after receiving hundreds of messages from people sharing similar experiences, she realized her voice could make a difference. Online communities buzzed with discussions about accessibility and customer service. A popular YouTuber created a video analyzing the incident, praising both Keanu's intervention and the store's response. "Notice how he didn't shame the employee," the YouTuber pointed out. "He turned it into a teaching moment. That's how real change happens." The woman's co-workers were amazed when they heard the story. In their tech company's next team meeting, she used the experience to pitch a new project, developing software to help businesses better serve customers with disabilities. Her manager immediately greenlit the initiative. Other celebrities shared the video, but with a twist. They highlighted not Keanu's star power, but his humanity. "It's not about being famous," one actress tweeted. "It's about being human and standing up for what's right." The message resonated with millions. Local disability rights advocates used the momentum to push for better enforcement of accessibility laws. They pointed out that while this incident had a positive ending, many similar situations go unnoticed and unaddressed every day. The story had started a larger conversation about how society treats its most vulnerable members. 6 months after the incident, the electronics store had transformed into something of a landmark. Customers would often point to the spot where Keanu Reeves had stood up for accessibility rights. But the real changes went far deeper than just a famous memory. They had created ripples that continue to spread throughout the retail industry and beyond. The woman's software project had taken off beyond her wildest dreams. What started as a simple idea in response to her experience had grown into a full-fledged accessibility platform. Major retailers were now using her software to train their employees and improve store layouts. Sometimes the best solutions come from challenging experiences, she told a tech magazine that featured her on their cover. The store itself had become a model for accessible shopping. They'd redesigned their entire layout, installing adjustable height displays and wider aisles. The customer service counter had been completely rebuilt to be accessible from any height. "We wanted to make sure," the store manager explained to a local news crew, "that what happened that day would never happen again. Not here, not anywhere." The employee who had refused to help that day had undergone a complete transformation. Instead of letting the incident destroy his career, he used it as a turning point. He now volunteered with accessibility advocacy groups and spoke at retail training seminars about his experience. "I was that guy," he would say, "the one who thought customer service was beneath him. I was wrong, and learning that changed my life." Keanu's quiet act of kindness had sparked a movement in Hollywood. Other celebrities began highlighting accessibility issues in their own communities. A popular streaming service launched a documentary series about everyday heroes making spaces more inclusive. The first episode featured the woman from the electronics store, though Keanu politely declined to appear, preferring to let the focus remain on the larger issue. The store's corporate office had made good on their promises. They'd rolled out comprehensive accessibility training across all their locations. Other retail chains took notice and followed suit. Industry magazines wrote about a retail revolution in customer service, tracing it back to that fateful afternoon in Los Angeles. On social media, the hashtag #RetailForAll had become a platform for people to share both positive and negative experiences with store accessibility. But unlike many viral movements that fade quickly, this one had staying power. People used it to celebrate improvements and call attention to areas still needing change. The woman's tech company had given her a team to expand her accessibility software project. They were now working on artificial intelligence that could help stores identify and remove barriers for customers with disabilities. "Innovation comes from understanding real needs," she explained at a tech conference. "Sometimes it takes a moment of tension to spark real change." Local schools began incorporating the story into their lessons about citizenship and social responsibility. Teachers used it to show students that standing up for others doesn't require superhero powers, just the courage to speak up when something isn't right. The store had placed a small plaque near the customer service desk. It didn't mention Keanu or the incident specifically, but simply read, "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. No exceptions." Customers often paused to read it, and new employees were told the story during their training. 1 year after the incident, the woman returned to the store. The changes were immediately obvious, from the automatic doors to the accessible checkout counters. As she rolled through the aisles, several employees greeted her warmly. The manager recognized her and came over to chat, proudly showing her all the improvements they'd made. "You know," she told him, "when I came in that day, I just wanted to buy a laptop. I never expected to help start a movement." The manager smiled. "That's often how the biggest changes happen. One person, one moment, one decision to do the right thing." Keanu himself never spoke publicly about the incident, true to his humble nature, but occasionally, when fans would mention it during movie promotions, a small smile would cross his face. It wasn't about him after all. It was about something much bigger, about how small acts of kindness can spark lasting change.